I'm going to talk about making up the future and passing on the past. So I do quite a lot of different stuff, but I've tried to concentrate this down into a tiny bit of time and talk about these two. So on the topic of time, I wanted to say that we all have the same amount of time here. So why are we struggling to push forward all the time? And why are we wishing we could go back? It's a fine balance. We're all fascinated by the idea of knowing what has not yet been, predicting fate, being first. Let's face it, the future is exciting. But why are the old stories always the best? So we'll get to the old stories a bit later, but to start with, I wanted to talk about creative research. What is it? What is cool hunting or trend forecasting? It's actually something you all do every day without realizing it. So, for example, you all knew the iPhone needed a flash before it had one? Yeah, so you do it. Based on past events and things that have been discovered before, we all make up our future predictions. The sun will go down every day, spring comes after summer, it will snow if it's cold, all of this stuff. So culturally, it's the same thing, it's just subtler. So it's all about awareness of everything that's happening in all the threads of culture all the time. But it's also the opinion of the groups that are affected by these cultural changes. For example, some context. The mini disc was great for about 5 minutes, based on the fact that the Walkman, which came before it, was a great idea. So we all needed more space, we all needed more stuff, we all want to listen to music on the move, but this doesn't hold enough, so the mini disc, brilliant, let's have it. It's the next best thing. But after a very short amount of time, anyone in the music technology industry could have told you to sell it before you couldn't, because something bigger and better was on the way. Why? Because they were technology experts, completely at the bleeding edge of it every day, but not everybody knew this. This is why this information is valuable to the industry, because not everybody can be totally immersed in each area of culture at the same time, because you wouldn't be able to see the wood for the trees. So as a researcher, it's down to your network of experts, or mavens. If you've not heard the term maven before, Wikipedia will tell you that, I quote, "A maven is a trusted expert in a particular field who seeks to pass knowledge on to others," so people like me. The word maven comes from Hebrew via Yiddish and means one who understands based on accumulation of knowledge. Malcolm Gladwell uses it in his book, The Tipping Point, to describe those who are intense gatherers of information and impressions, and so are often the first to pick up on new trends in their area of obsession, shall we say. So imagine if you had a keyring guy that into keyrings for every area of culture that you could call on at any time and find out what was coming down the line, and then add all those ideas together, you'd start to see some pretty amazing patterns coming up. Malcolm Gladwell also suggests that mavens may act most effectively when in collaboration with connectors. So these are casual acquaintances. They have a wide network of people who trust them, and they often have a network that crosses many social boundaries and different groups. So connectors can basically distribute the information that the mavens give them. So am I a connector? Kind of. I'd say I'm more of a hunter-gatherer type, maybe. So I can see a lot of stuff, basically. So I read a lot of these, do a lot of this, download loads of these, probably way more than I need. I travel a lot, and I see a lot of art, music, underground events, fashion weeks, parties, theatre, food and drink, architecture, hotels and shops around the world. What's most important is that I see it firsthand and stay connected to these experts and advisors that I trust if I can't see it myself. So the point of it is to sieve out golden nuggets. This is kind of how I do it, really. I sieve out these nuggets and I pass them on to companies to use commercially. Sometimes I do get it wrong. Sometimes I do think things are cool when they're not. But mostly I blame that on the internet. It's not my fault. Shoddy researching when I'm not out and about, this kind of stuff happens. So this is kind of how we see into the future, if you will. It's basically made up. So instead of just your opinion, you have many opinions, basically. You can view situations from a really great height instead of being in it. And it's where it's easier to see the patterns from, basically, so all the nuggets. By information being gathered up and trickling down and down and down and down and down, it connects to the masses and ends up becoming part of the process to invent the thing you're waiting for. So global consciousness, something in the air, all those things, they're kind of true, really. So there's something in this idea of passing things on, I think, for the good of the future, if you will, which brings me to my next item. So I have a radio show called The Butcher's Apron, and it's an hour-long theme-timed radio show that invites and explores the unexpected. So every month, me and, don't look at the smoking or the booze, me and Nadine, Nadine's the arts publisher for the Hayward Gallery and in the South Bank Centre, and we comb the stretch of this peculiar land to bring you fascinating features, interviews and stories from Britain's soft underside, so it's very British-centric. I do a lot of creative projects, and I've realised that radio is actually probably the most visual form of art that I do, maybe because you can't see it. But we started it because after sieving out all these commercially viable nuggets, if you will, there seemed to be many more that just didn't have anywhere to live. The kind of ones that you'd retell in a pub, or like an anecdote at Christmas, something you'd tell your friend to make them feel better. Sometimes they were just weirdly there in our lives, and sometimes we weren't looking for them, I have to admit. But on the whole, the idea, strangely, is the same as these connectors I spoke about just now. We want to utilise a network that crosses many social boundaries and groups, so namely internet radio, and pass on the amazing things that we find. The difference, and I guess maybe the point, is that we pass these on for the good of humankind, and maybe not for business yet, but we connect everything up and just wait, and hopefully it'll do something good in the world. So that's what I'm going to try and do now, and pass on what we think is a fitting story for this talk. So we're editing a show at the moment called Speed, which is kind of relevant, I guess, for time. And this is one of loads and loads of stories that's in that show. And it will be on NTS on the 29th, I think. I'm podcasted, but I'll tell you how to listen to it later. So it's a story about restoration, basically. First, that of an old car, which enables the restoration of old relationships. It's a unique and universal tale, I guess. So it's about reminding us that it's never too late to journey into your past. So lots to talk about the future, but also this is important. However you choose to get there, and maybe mend things, damage that's once done. So this is a story that's basically been made into a film called Driven. And our part on the radio is played by interviewing the people who made this film and how they found the story, and then how we found the story, and pass it on to you, really. So I'm going to try and tell you the story, and I'll play you a bit of footage from the story in the background as well, so you get an idea of what it's about. So when you think about London, it's hard not to think about taxis as a part of the scenery, landmarks. You know, you all know them, we live here. But you don't really think of them as becoming vehicles for like a couple's lifelong adventure around the world. So this is a story about two people who did exactly that. Their heartbreaking separation halfway through, and a heroic reunion 50 years later. So this taxi is one that's part of the greatest love story we've ever been told, and we've retold it ever since. So I'm going to play some of that footage now, hopefully, if it's not too loud. And just as a backdrop to the story, because we're editing it now, so I'll do my very best to tell it as best I can. So in the summer of 1955, American Alfred Hobbs and his new Danish wife were living in Casablanca, Morocco, where they discovered a vintage London taxi. Over the next 4 years, the couple would drive the car across the entire globe, starting with a daring crossing of the actual Sahara Desert. As you can see from their footage, it really was an amazing, incredible journey. They ended as near celebrities on TV in Japan and nearly died several times along the way. But then it was all over. The couple returned home to the US with the taxi. So after all of this, life soon returned to normal, and Alfred grew stir-crazy, eager for more adventures. So one day, with little warning, he got up and left Jacobine, and she was devastated. A chance encounter at a party 30 years later would forever reconnect them, and they ended up sleeping together. Jacobine became pregnant, and 9 months later, their baby boy was born. Alfred Hobbs, the adventurer, has a son. But Niels grew up without a father, only learning about this man through bedtime stories his mother told him about their incredible adventures in the London taxi. 50 years later, having lived a life of selfishness and never remarrying, Alfred Hobbs looks out of his window at that deteriorated London taxi, his oldest friend and a symbol of the adventurer he once was, and of the marriage he destroyed all those years ago. At 84, Alfred has a plan. Niels Hobbs, his son, receives an email from his estranged father with a completely unexpected proposal. With the last bit of money that he has in his whole world, Alfred explains he wants to bring the taxi back to life and drive it all the way across America from his home in Taos, New Mexico, eastwards, to find Jacobine and surprise her with their taxi, offering her one last ride. But he can't make it on his own. He needs his son to join him on the quest. It's inconceivable, but Niels agrees without hesitation. Months later, the taxi, in a cloud of smoke, is running for the first time in 50 years. Niels arrives in Taos with considerable trepidation. The two climb aboard and they're off. It isn't long before the old taxi fails again and again. If it weren't for the kindness of strangers enchanted by this old car and where it's heading, they would never have been able to keep it moving. As they drive, we learn the grand adventures from this taxi's first great road trip. Niels explores the stories he knew as a child, and in the process hopefully gets to know this man, his father, better, while unraveling his motivations for this eccentric journey. How will Jacobine react to the surprise from this man she has never completely forgiven? After weeks on the road, completely exhausted from the severe challenges of their endeavour, we'll be beside the two men as they anxiously cross the bridge to the rural farmhouse where Jacobina lives with Rusty, the gentleman she married 30 years ago. Hearing an unusual sound, she steps into her garden. And if you want to know more, you'll have to listen to the radio show. I'm actually going to play you the trailer that they've made for the film, which you'll hear in our show, just to give you an idea of how epic it is. It's amazing. And then I'm going to tell you a bit about how you can find out more other than on the radio. So here we go.
This guy who I've never really known, who I know is my dad, but I've never really grown up knowing him. I was raised more of Alfred as being this distant, nebulous, mythic character. Children are brought up with Grimm's fairy tales or whatever. My fairy tales were tales of my mother's adventures with Alfred. I think he very much loved my mother, at all times. But he clearly was a guy that needs to be on his own. So he set out on his own, they got divorced. She was heartbroken, utterly devastated by it. The taxi, after its great adventure around the world, sat for decades. A few years ago, Alfred pulled it out, dragged it out to New Mexico with the hope of potentially fixing it up. For him, it's the last great physical manifestation of that old story that he wants to give to me. And we're gonna hope to God that it can drive across the country and come and surprise the hell out of my mom with it.
Hey, Jacobina, where are you? I need you. Okay. Now, this is going to be a trip to have her. That's going to be a score. I will hope my old eyes can see her face.
It's going to be pretty epic, I think.
There you have it. It's a pretty intense story. So the reason we love this story is that it spans back over 50 years and encompasses the present and also the future. So what I mean by that is in how the story will be passed on through all of their families and now maybe yours, maybe mine. It's totally universal in its themes, so love, loss, compassion, revenge, pride, adventure, dreams, all the things that we want from a story over time. It's something we can relate to. So the point is that we should all be aware that storytelling is as much about the future as it is about the past. So we've learned that yes, the future is exciting because we are making it right now, all of you, all of us. But I think that working and investigating a time in the future, sometimes decades ahead, is balanced out for me by the tangible stories that we tell on the radio. Jonathan, the director of Driven, said that what he'd learned over everything else during the emotional roller coaster of capturing Alfred and Jacobine's lives is that we don't listen to old people enough. They know loads of stuff because they've been there and they've lived it, and they're telling you from experience. So listen to old people, guys. My point is, from all of this today, is the important thing is that you must pass things on. It's what makes the foundations to build the future on. In a super fast, switched on, plugged in world, perhaps we're scared of forgetting to document things. What if all your photos were deleted, the ones you never printed out? Are we scared of getting ourselves lost? Perhaps we don't gather so many material things around us anymore to build our personalities, which makes the stories we tell more important. Of course, maybe this has always been the case. So knowledge really is power. If you can remember stories and retell them, nothing is lost and the future will happen, precisely because of the past and maybe what we know in the present, the never-ending now. So every single one of the keyring guys, the mavens, the experts, has lived an entire life of keyrings. He knows the history of them through and through and is waiting and willing to tell you the story of them, and to anyone who is willing to listen. He bases all of his judgment on the future, on the history of keyrings. So like the connectors, I spend my life finding stuff out, making stuff up, and then passing it on. And maybe we all should, which is the end. So if you need to know anything about any of that, please have a look at these websites and you can find out what happened.